We will have to turn around our thinking. And currently what we do is we have a very refined, precise question, and then we select people for inclusion in a very targeted way. In the next period of time, we are going to operate very differently. We are going to collect data from individuals, whether they are in good health, exposed to risk, or in the onset of disease. And later on, we are going to be able, through the computer system, to reconstruct clinical trials addressing very specific questions.
I think that one key concept for future clinical trials is the concept of endotype, which some of the speakers mentioned. Okay? An endotype is a biological mechanism that can allow you to stratify patients with apparently the same disease, so apparently the same phenotype. So I think that we need systems biology, network medicine, data sharing to identify basically endotypes that allow us to stratify patients.
Well, I would say that what we need is well-performed studies, and at least have like the proofs or the quality controls that these studies had. And if we want to use data that was generated before, is not, we had to try to replicate the key findings in several places, doing different methodologies, because we know that will be variability, but if something is true or likely to be true, it will be here in your lab and in another lab where the variability and the quality control will not be the same.
In science, in research, if a biological phenomenon is true, really true, you need one individual to show that this is true. However, you need two to do some statistics. And actually, you need three to convince the reviewer.
That is probably the most misunderstood question in science today, is this reproducibility issue. And when we're dealing with biological systems, I mean, as a systems biologist, I say context matters. You know, it's impossible to replicate every variable in reproducing an experiment. And you can measure, the system is responding, but it may respond a little bit differently. Then we should do a lot of experiments and do it over a lot of conditions, and then what we learn over that is the result. But a single experiment tells us mostly about context.
In my opinion, it should be open from the start. I think it's the only right way to do it. I know it's a very controversial subject. I can maybe explain it better about code. If you make code that you write, which you have authorship on, open from the start, especially in a setting like this where we're all working together as researchers, you can immediately get feedback from others. You can start to collaborate with others. And the problem if you don't make it open from the start is that you have then to make a decision, when do I make it open? And what I very often see happen with open source projects, for example, originating in academia, that people say, well, I don't want to make it open from the start because I want to publish it. I want to have, you know, some demonstrable version that I can present at a conference, and only then will I make it open. I'm not ready to accept feedback yet because I want to work on my prototype first and explore some things. I don't want other people to start messing in my code while my ideation about it is not ready. And I think all of this on the face are valid arguments. It's just that in practice, looking at the data, what I often see happen is that projects that are open from the start are much more successful in attracting collaborations.
This becomes ultimately a social question, doesn't it? The way that society is organized, the way that we conduct our research, and I think almost if you ask any researcher in a university or even a scientist in a company who is collecting data in order to try and prove or disprove a particular hypothesis, they're going to have enormous problems with the idea of making all that data available as soon as they start collecting it. because the work that they are doing is then jeopardized. And that's a problem that you're not going to be able to get around. So we're stuck at the moment with the situation. We collect our data, we write our paper, and once you get your paper published, then a lot of the time you have to upload the data anyway to support your publication, and that's when it becomes open and can be used for further research. So I think it's important here to consider also the question that we haven't actually spoken about, and that is not necessarily just the use of data in research, but the reuse of data in further research. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have in use of data at the moment is not necessarily accessing the data to use it for research, but is accessing it for reuse after you've collected it for the primary purpose.
I think it's interesting to compare the Human Genome Project, which you can compare to many of the open source projects in the data was actually being made open essentially as it came off, well, not the sequencing machines in those days, but as it was generated. And I think the reason why that worked as a completely open from the start was because there was a very strong social contract. You had the Bermuda and the Toronto declarations within a small tight-knit community where there was a gentleman's agreement to share credit, and there was rules for how credit was shared within that community, which I think is very similar to successful open source project, because there is a social contract for how you generate credit in that. I think the other extreme of this, I think you can look at the patent system, which is essentially open data, just a 25-year delay. So the contract society have around a patent is that you as an inventor disclose your invention into the public domain. And in exchange for that disclosure, you get market monopoly for 25 years or something like that. But actually the patent system were originally devised to force out new mechanical inventions in the public domains for other engineers to look at and be inspired by. So that's open data, but it's with a very, very long time delay and with some really quite substantial benefits to the inventor. For science, I think for me there is a very natural breakage point at the time where you publish a paper. So you make data available for others to read and understand in context of that paper.
When it is subsidized by public money, in my opinion, it should be by definition available at all times.
Is it why Framingham is available?
And so with Keith Elliston, when he was at Merck, right, we campaigned to get cDNA sequencing resources available to the entire community. I think we have yet to publish a joint paper to show how beneficial that has been. But it was a big fight because even in private sector, there are people who understand that it is through sharing that we are the most effective. And the divide is not between public and private. We have people in academy and in hospital who, for reasons of promotion, positions, really are preventing sharing of data in ways that are not productive.
When we talk about sharing, I think we talked about the patent law. And what we did was create a legal framework that facilitated sharing. When we looked at publishing, we created a legal framework that facilitated sharing, copyright and whatnot. And one of the things that stimulated open source software is copywriting a work of authorship and having a license that allowed you to share. One of the challenges we have with data is we don't have that legal framework. The only way you can protect data is with a specific contract with a specific person. There are some efforts in the UK where they have now what's called data rights. Data rights are like a copyright for data, but it's only in the UK. Everywhere else we don't have this protection. I think we need to think about, particularly in this concept of having the data scientists working with data, because they're using everybody else's data. They're not generating their own. How do we protect that data? How do we work with that data?
That's a very good point, Keith. And in fact, when it comes to translational medicine, we have actually an even worse situation, because at least in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation actually stipulates that you cannot process health data. except when you have specific things met, like an informed consent and so forth. And so there the primary legal basis for what we're trying to do is actually, it's illegal, but, yeah. And so that I think is really a major societal problem. That the whole concept is that this information is so private and has to be kept so secret that actually you shouldn't be working with it.
We're looking at the healthcare environment here as an environment where there's a tremendous lot of money. So there's always big commercial interest somewhere. And I mean, it seems to me that a lot of the murkiness and the difficulties that are involved there is because it's not clear who owns what. Can't we go and just very, very clearly say every piece of personal information that is generated belongs to that person, period. And everything else follows, right? Let's just take banking, like our financial information, very personally related. There's some aggregation, some statistics that is done, but in principle you own that, and if somebody abuses it, that is a criminal offense, whatever. Wouldn't that be a fairly straightforward, simple solution?
Point to Denmark, which has gone completely the other way around, and said that because we have a public healthcare funded system, we own the data collectively, and you can opt out with good reasons, but otherwise we'll take the aggregate of that data and put it in one place where we can use that to develop healthcare further. It's I can have sympathy for both views.